So in the last section, we wrote a unit test around this ngOnInit method. However, this method is one of those cases that is better to be tested using integration tests. Why? Because this method is called automatically by Angular at the time this component is initialized. And this will happen only if we have this implement onInit here. In other words, if I accidentally forget to add this here, we're not going to have any compile time errors here. So ngOnInit is just like a simple method in this class. Angular is not going to call this. So our unit test may pass, but the component is not going to work. So we need to write an integration test for this method. And in that integration test, we need to get a reference to our dependency, this service. And then we need to change the implementation of getToDo's method. So let's go to our spec file. So this component should load to-dos from the server. Now here we need to get a reference to that service dependency. How do we do that? There are two ways. First, I'm going to show you the simpler way. We can get it from the test bed. So testbed.get. And here we add to-do service. And this will provide a reference to a service that is injected in our component. Now this works if you have provided that dependency at the module level. So in our application, we have this app module or perhaps many other modules. And we register our dependencies at the module level in this providers array here. Now, when you provide a dependency here, Angular is going to create only a single instance of that dependency at the module level. So if we have 5 components and all of them are using this service, there is only one instance of that service in the memory. We call this a singleton. Now, this approach is fine for most of the scenarios out there. However, you may have a scenario where you may prefer to have a separate instance of that service or that dependency, whatever that is, per component. In that case, instead of registering that dependency at the module level, you would register it at the component level. So in this case, we could go to to-dos component and in the component metadata, add the providers here. Now these providers are specific to this component. So if we have multiple instances of this component on one page, each instance will have its own dependencies. Now, once again, for the most part, you don't really need to do this unless you have very strong reasons to do so. Now, in these situations, you cannot get that dependency from the testbed because this only returns the dependencies that are registered at the module level. Now, to get a dependency from a component directly, we need to use fixture.debugelement.injector.get. And here we add to the service. Now you can see this approach is a little bit more verbose. It's too noisy. So let's delete it and use the test bed. So here's our service. Now, similar to what you learned in the last section, we need to change the implementation of getToDo's method using a spy. So spy on service getToDo's and return value. Now here we need an observable. I'm going to go on the top and import observable from rxjs, not rxjs/observable, because this is the lightweight observable, and I don't want to explicitly import all the operators we're going to use. For the production application, it makes a difference because that's an optimization technique. Now back to our test. We're going to create an observable from an array. And here we need to add the response that is returned from the server. Let's imagine that is an array of 3 items. Okay? Now let's do the assertion. So we expect component.todos.length to be 3. Now in the unit testing section, we wrote this test in a more specific way. So instead of checking the length, we checked that the exact same object returned from the server is set here. Let's save. Back in the terminal, our test failed. Expected 0 to be 3. What's going on here? The reason this happens is because of this line of code here. that is automatically generated when we create a component using Angular CLI. So after we create a component, when we call detect changes, Angular calls ng-on-init. At this point, our service is already called, and it's too late to change the implementation of getToDo's method to return a hard-coded array. So we need to delete this line here. First, change the implementation of our service, and then call fixture.detectChanges. At this point, Angular calls ng-on-init and initializes the toDo's property. Save, and all our tests are passing. Beautiful.